Palm Beach near the president's Mar-a-Lago residence. Hi, Bri.
Hi, David. Well, look, rumors about the caravan rushing the border have been rampant for weeks now. And earlier this week, for instance, the San Ysidro boarding crossing, one of the busiest along the border, closed some northern-bound lanes because of these rumors that some of these immigrants in this caravan were going to rush the border. Nonetheless, Sky News is reporting that there is talk that some of these 6,000 members of the caravan are thinking about heading towards the border this weekend. Why this weekend? Well, a federal judge issued a temporary restraining order on the executive order that the Trump administration put in, saying that all of these immigrants that wanted to apply for asylum must go to a legal border crossing. Well, a judge nixed that temporarily, at least. And so now the thought is that perhaps some of these immigrants are going to make their way to the border. Troops have been deployed to the border. Some 5,900 of them have been putting concertina wire, that razor wire, and erecting barriers along the border. They are there to support the Border Patrol if they ever get overwhelmed. In fact, the chief of staff for the White House, John Kelly, authorized lethal force for these troops to use it if they need it. In the memo saying, quote, a show or use of force, including lethal force where necessary, crowd control, temporary detention, and cursory search. The memo went on to say the deployed military personnel shall not, without further direction from you, conduct traditional civilian law enforcement activities such as arrest, search, and seizure in connection with the enforcement of the laws. So General Jim Mattis explained that these troops, they are not armed. They are here at the border. They are putting down the wire, and they are not actually even supposed to make any arrests. If they do detain an immigrant, they are to hand over that immigrant over to local police so that they do not violate federal law. Earlier this week on Thanksgiving Day, President Trump said that he is actually willing to shut down the entire border if this caravan situation doesn't get handled quickly.
It gets to a level where we are going to lose control or where people are going to start getting hurt, we will close entry into the country for a period of time until we can get it under control. The whole border. I mean, the whole border. And Mexico will not be able to sell their cars into the United States, where they make so many cars at great benefit to them.
The mayor of Tijuana, where the majority of the caravan is right now, more than 5,000 people, many of them women and children, saying that they're fleeing poverty and violence, are in Tijuana. And the mayor there has declared a humanitarian crisis, saying they just can't they don't know what to do with all of these folks. And frankly, David, they could be there for months, given the lines that are at these border crossings and the asylum process. It could be months, and these people don't have anywhere to go. They can't go back to Honduras, and they're not allowed to come into the United States. So that is why the Tijuana mayor is concerned. And finally, David, all of this has prompted the president to say he's willing to perhaps shut down the government if they don't give him that $5 billion that he's been asking for that border wall. We've heard him make this threat multiple times this year. We'll see if it comes through.
Brian Yennis in Florida with the president. Brian, thank you very much. Well, as that migrant caravan gathers on the southern border, President Trump is accusing liberal judges of putting national security at risk by blocking his attempt to tighten the rules on migrants who claim asylum. With us now, attorney Lisa Giovinazzo with more on this. Good to see you, Lisa. So what are the rules on claiming asylum?
Well, look, the rules for each person claiming asylum are weighed on an individual case-by-case basis, or they can look to exceptions in the law. So the law does weigh somebody coming in through an undesignated area as a factor. However, it isn't something that they can deny asylum on. And here's where it gets tricky for Trump, right? Because he also did propose new rules through the Department of Homeland Security, saying that now we're giving you the authority to deny asylum if you come through an undesignated area. But this is an area that was already really fleshed out through statute, fleshed out even by the United States Supreme Court in some manners, that says, you know, you can't re-regulate an area that we've already, you know, legislated this space.
But what gets me about the judge's ruling is it doesn't deal with the real world. The real world is that we have 5,000 people in Tijuana. We have thousands of people at other points along the border. And our forces along the border are overwhelmed. The judge who made his ruling is not dealing with the process of border areas and an entire border with Mexico that is overwhelmed now with a situation that has to be addressed immediately. We can't wait for the weeks and weeks and weeks it would take for Congress to come up with a new law on asylum.
Well, you do have a couple of weeks, right? It's temporary restraining order, so they will have, a formal order coming down the week before Christmas. But things could change, right? You said they're heating up. We're seeing it in Mexico. We have a precedent coming from Greece and watching them, how they're handling their situation, which is putting so much pressure on their government and courts. They're arguing it out. So Trump's doing his job by initiating some foresight and trying to control this matter. He isn't getting a lot of help from the courts, but he's along the right path. If he would have proposed these rules, a change in Department of Homeland Security prior to, rather than simultaneously with this new edict.
But again, there's no way that you can look into the future and tell what's going to happen. We are faced now, the United States is faced with an emergency on the border. Congress, as we know, is not going to get anything done at least into the next year, if at all.
No,
something has to be done now. And I don't think this judge's decision has nothing to do with the process of containing the situation.
Well, again, you're talking about the Ninth Circuit, right?
Yeah.
We were anticipating something would come out of this circuit by the makeup of the court. But this doesn't bind his hands in any way. I mean, the president has indicated, I can close the borders, I can stall, I can do a lot of things to prevent this from happening. I mean, he's doing his job, right? He has to protect America. He has to then protect the people that seek asylum here, which we certainly won't be able to do if we get an incredible influx. But, he also does have to do it within the confines of the law. And this is the balancing act for this president the whole way through. I think he's getting better at it, and I think he will address this issue successfully. But I don't know about, he doesn't generally win in this particular circuit.
All right. Lisa Giovinazzo, thank you very much for coming in. Good to see you. We want to take you back to the streets of Paris. This is happening right along the Champs-Élysées, right in the heart of the iconic district of Paris, where you see big fires. These are live shots, I believe now. It's dark or getting dark at 5 p.m. in the evening on the streets of Paris, just down the road from the Arc de Triomphe. Massive protests, and as you can see, a massive fire building along with the protests. For the moment, the police seem helpless to put this particular fire out. But again, it all started over gas prices, which, as we remind you, are twice. And again, these are live shots. You can hear what sounds like shots. It may be the shots from those cannons, those gas cannons that they use. But these protests are totally out of control. It's worth mentioning, by the way, that as the United States is taking a lot of heat from folks around the world saying how violent our discourse has become between the right and the left, look what's happening on the streets of Paris. And this is just on the issue of gas prices. When gas prices go high, thankfully gas prices have been pretty low in the past couple of weeks in the United States, relatively speaking. But we generally don't burn fires along Fifth Avenue. And this is the Champs-Élysées in Paris. This is not a really small section of Paris. This is right in the heart of where all the tourists are, the financial heart of the capital, if you will. They're burning fires. They're sending out troops. They're sending in the water cannons. This is quite something. I want to bring back, as we continue to show these pictures on the left side of your screen here, let's bring back our business panel. We have Susan Lee in house with us right now. We have Gary Kaltbaum next to her and Lindsay Bell. Gary, it is kind of interesting that, you hear all kinds of stuff these days about America, and it's true. Our discourse has fallen on the foul side rather than the fair side, but you don't see this going on here.
Well, a video is worth 100,000 words as we're looking at this right now. And look, the people, what do they complain about? You got to pay for those vacations and all the social programs, and this is what you get. Macron, I think, is polling right now at about 26%. Looks like it may go into the teens, and this is going to get worse before it gets better. I gather there's going to have to be some changes on this pretty quickly if he knows what's good for him.
Susan, I must say I am kind of on the side of Gary and General Keane on not having a lot of sympathy for the French, who have these extraordinary labor laws that allow them to take, everybody has a 3-day weekend, which would be nice.
Right. Lack of labor
which would be very nice. But on the other hand,
3 months off for summer, right?
There is the Arc de Triomphe triumph there. But it does speak to a larger point about the economy around the world, particularly in Europe right now, shrinking.
Yes.
And they're trying to make ends meet with their huge government spending by raising taxes even more on gasoline. Now, they're already paying twice what we are, so you can understand the frustration of even people who aren't on the streets of Paris right now protesting. But this slowdown, this economic slowdown is affecting us right here. That's one of the reasons the stock market's been misbehaving.
It's the macroeconomic picture in this globalized world that we live in. And you're right, Europe isn't growing at all. So how can you raise prices on gas when the people aren't finding the jobs and making the money in order to pay for the higher gas prices? And yes, that impacts us here in the U.S. because we are looking at the worst Thanksgiving week since 2011. And part of the concern is about non-growth in Europe and also slowing growth in China as well.
And Lindsay, I'm wondering what this brings out, what we're seeing on the streets of Paris brings out in the political field. Gary mentioned that Macron, the current president, is barely in double digits in terms of popularity. Waiting in the wings, I'm sure, are a whole lot of people from the far right to the far left. You wonder where this will end. In Britain right now, by the way, they're going through their own problems with Brexit. There's a real chance that the socialists might come in and take over. This is also weighing on the markets. Is it not the fear that some extremist, one side or the other, will take over and make matters worse?
Oh, yeah, certainly. You've seen the market react to the elections in Italy, obviously what's going on in the UK and the Brexit decision. So certainly that's weighing on the market. You saw this week the OECD came out and they lowered their estimates for global growth going into next year. And part of that was the Eurozone, that they cut the numbers there. And look, Germany just reported their most recent quarter of GDP was in negative territory. So you're seeing a slowdown in these exporting countries, and it's just probably a matter of time before it impacts the U.S., which is an importing
Let me tell you the biggest
country.
problem. They still have negative rates over there, and they're still printing money. And now Europe, I think all of Europe is contracting. What other ammo are they going to have as they move forward? They are taxed big time. They just need to change the structure of Europe, and that's not going to happen.
Well, you say they've got to change, but the way that they're thinking of changing is by fueling government even more, and that's fueling the fires on the streets of Paris.
Look, the power should be in the people's hands. Unfortunately, it's in the government's hand. The spending there, the taxes there, it's always been a problem. And again, I have to repeat this. They still have negative rates and printing money, the easiest monetary policy in history, and they're contracting in most of Europe going forward. This is a real big problem.
There's going to be government turnover. You saw that with Angela Merkel, who says that she will be stepping down. She won't be seeking re-election. The German chancellor. We know that Macron, his popularity rating is dreadful at this point. I think it's below 40%. And in the UK, we have Theresa May. Prime Minister might be out on a non-confidence vote. So, you see these pictures, you see what's happening on the streets of Paris. I think that's indicative of some of the unhappiness that they have with their heads of government.
Lindsay, even if the president is able to get some kind of agreement out of President Xi, the Chinese president, in Argentina in a week, that's the big summit that's taking place, could events over in Europe make things impossible for us to avoid? So even if we get an agreement with China, maybe we'll still go through the market contractions we've been seeing.
No, I think that the China thing, if we get an agreement, something that is actually going to stick and be positive for both countries and the global economy in general, then I think you can see a huge pop in the market, regardless of what's happening in Europe, because there's bigger implications there. We import over, almost $600 billion worth of goods.
Do you really think we're going to get something, or
well,
we're just
so
going to get some
that's a different
yapping?
question.
Yeah.
Yes, I don't think we're going to get anything. I think that
what I think is they're going to hold off, or the administration is going to hold off on imposing 25% of tariffs. They'll say there's a detente at 10%. We're not going to go further in 25, and I still think that has upside potential for the markets.
There is no detente at all in Paris between the protesters and the police. By the way, usually you see the police in the vests. I believe the vests now are being worn by the protesters themselves as we go into darkness on the streets of Paris. Confusing things even more. But this, by the way, once again, I can't emphasize enough, this is not in a dark corner of Paris. This is on the major thoroughways of Paris. These protests taking place on the Champs-Élysées, right up the street from the Arc de Triomphe. This is a big protest, and it's over gas prices, but one suspects that is just the tip of the iceberg. we'll keep you updated on what's happening in Paris as night falls and the fires rise up on the Champs-Élysées. Meanwhile, here at home, millions of Americans are heading home. It'll be tomorrow. Jackie Henrik is at LaGuardia Airport in New York with the very latest on how travelers are doing. I know we're expecting some bad weather, right?
Yeah, David, for the most part, this storm held off until after turkey dinner, but it is threatening to pack a powerful punch just as we head into the busiest travel day of this holiday weekend. That's tomorrow, with millions of people heading home. An estimated 54.3 million people will be traveling 50 miles or more over the holiday weekend, according to AAA. It's the highest number since 2005 and an increase of about 2.5 million since last year. The rate has been steadily climbing over the last 10 years. While most people are driving, plenty are flying, enough to compel the Transportation Safety Administration to add 1,200 officers and 80 screening canines across the country. Here in New York, the Port Authority is recommending that people take public transportation to the airport so that roads don't get clogged. At least one airline here said that flights are 95% full. What all that means is if the storm brewing in the Midwest hits as hard as it's projected to, a lot of people are going to be holiday stranded. Low pressure ramping up in the plains is threatening significant wind and snowfall by late weekend. Winter weather warnings and advisories extend from Wyoming to Missouri. Some places could see whiteout conditions.
I've already told everybody they need to go ahead and get all the bad weather, get all the snow. Y'all can have 24 inches. I don't care what you have. But when I get back on December 10th, nothing.
100%, especially when you're traveling with 7 children.
Well, it's no surprise that the majority of the top 10 travel destinations are balmy and warm this time of year, with 8 of the 10 in the 50s or higher right now. But all those people have to travel home tomorrow, so let's hope that everybody got their fill before this storm really hits. David?
Jackie.
The Senate since 1982, but some Democrats are feeling more hopeful than ever that that streak is about to end. This race has gone from solidly Republican to lean Republican after Republican Senator Cindy Hyde-Smith was caught on camera saying she liked one of her supporters so much she'd be on the front row if he invited her to a public hanging. At a debate this week, Hyde-Smith apologized for the statement, but then went on the attack and blamed her opponent, Democrat Mike Espy.
For anyone that was offended by my comments, I certainly apologize. There was no ill will, no intent whatsoever in my statements. I also recognize that this comment was twisted and it was turned into a weapon to be used against me, a political weapon used for nothing but personal and political gain by my opponent.
Well, no one twisted your comments because the comments were live. It came out of your mouth. And I don't know what's in your heart, but we all know what came out of your mouth.
On Election Day, Hyde-Smith was less than a single percentage point ahead of Democrat Mike Espy. However, Republican Chris McDaniel received 150,000 votes. So both sides realize Tuesday is all about turnout. Democrats are hoping Hyde-Smith's comments will tamp down the enthusiasm for Republicans to turn out. And Espy's campaign has been bringing in some star power of its own to get its voters excited, with potential 2020 candidates Senators Kamala Harris and Cory Booker. President Trump won the Magnolia State by more than 17 points, though, and he's slated to hold a pair of rallies on Monday, the day before voters head to the polls. Now, if Republicans can hold on to the seat, they will have 53 seats in the Senate. But if Mike Espy is able to pull it out, it'll be the second time in as many years that Democrats have won a Senate seat in the Deep South, after Doug Jones, of course, did that last year in Alabama. David?
Garrett, thank you very much. Well, from the Deep South to the Northeast, New York City's Democrat Mayor Bill de Blasio raising eyebrows this week for saying the nation's financial capital, New York, has socialistic impulses in every corner of the city. He spoke to New York Magazine about his desire to adjust government control of buildings and properties in accordance with these impulses. Mayor de Blasio saying, quote, "I think there is a socialistic impulse, which I hear every day in every kind of community, that they would like things to be planned in accordance to their needs, and I would too." Steve Forbes probably disagrees because he has very deep capitalist impulses. He joins us now. What do you think, Steve?
Well, he is a socialist. We call him Bolshevik Bill, not out
or
of affection.
Sandinista Bill, yeah.
Sandinista Bill. 30 years ago, he did go to Nicaragua, help that communist tyranny down there, and continued his work when he came back to New York, helping the Sandinistas. So he believes in socialist tyranny. If you want to see what kind of government he really has, just look at what happened during the storm in the streets of New York. He blamed it on the weather. Well, New York's had snow before, but he botched the cleanup of it. And that's what you get with that kind of government, lack of accountability. So he's just living up to his reputation. By the way, he did his honeymoon in Cuba when you weren't allowed to travel there. Yeah. So, yeah, he's a socialist. And so if you want to turn New York into a wreck, have him in charge of buildings. We won't have him anymore.
He says he sees these socialistic impulses in every corner of the city. I wonder if that includes Wall Street and Fifth Avenue and places that depend on capitalism.
Or the numerous immigrants who come to this city desiring to get ahead, who come to this town and put up with it, have the chance to move up, as Lincoln put it, improve your lot in life. So people come here to get ahead, not to be pushed down behind by the likes of Bolshevik Bill.
Well, he is putting his mouth, or our money where his mouth is. I say our because I'm a New York resident, but he has increased the New York City budget 30%, and yet people say the streets, and I'm witness to this, as I'm sure you are, the streets are dirtier. The subways don't work as well as they didn't never work great, but they're working worse now than they used to. You have more homeless on the streets. So where's all that money going?
Well, where did the money come from in the first place? The very people he wants to destroy with his socialism, communism. And so where does the money go? It goes into unaffordable pensions, goes to a bloat, and goes to absolute waste. But the infrastructure of the city, the streets, as you alluded to, are what you'd find in a strapped third world city, not New York City. And he'll blame this, he'll blame that, blame everyone but himself.
But you mentioned a great point, which is that they just instituted a new millionaire tax in New York. If you make more than $1 million, you pay an extra 8%. And again, I'm not crying over millionaires, but the point is a lot of people have the freedom to move out. And New York is not alone in this. San Francisco, other cities are doing similar sort of things. So when the rich move out as a result of socialistic mayors like de Blasio, what happens to the cities? They suddenly, as their money becomes more dependent on millionaires, and when those millionaires leave, the cities lose, right?
Well, they always take prosperity for granted. They think because it's prosperous today, it's going to be prosperous tomorrow and forever, and so they spend tomorrow's money. But especially today with high technology, David, it is very easy to move your brains elsewhere and do your work elsewhere with a handheld, with a desktop. And more and more people are going to do it. New Jersey, not very great, but a little better than New York City. You can go across the river. And 78, I live near Route 78 in New Jersey. It is packed in the morning. People coming from Pennsylvania, where they have a 3% income tax, avoiding New Jersey's 10%, New York's 10, 12, 13%. And you're going to see more of that. And people finally will be able to, with their handhelds, we don't even need to do the commute. What do you do then, Bolshevik Bill?
Well, it's not just a local issue. Bernie Sanders has come out this week with a new plan to lower drug prices by stripping away property rights. Another socialist who's got a socialistic answer. What he would do is those drug companies that, by his example, were charging too much for drug prices, he'd rip off their patent rights. In other words, intellectual property, it's not the same as physical property, but it's fundamentally the same legally, would be stripped away from certain people. What do you think?
Bernie Sanders and others criticize the Chinese for ripping off our technology, but he wants to do the same thing at home, steal your know-how. And if you do that, guess what? You don't get any more research. You don't get the new drugs and the medical devices that we need for the future to make our lives longer and of better quality. So it is thievery. And so you look at rent control. Why is it in Manhattan? You have to have 10 people in one apartment if you get a job in this town. And for all the problems of Chicago, one thing they did do right, David, is housing. They've got it for every market there.
By the way, I want to mention that our business team did call Mayor de Blasio early this week for an interview to no avail. We will keep trying. Meanwhile, Steve, I want to bring you overseas for a second because in a region of the world where they have been trying socialism practically on an annual basis with limited results, you see the results here on the streets of Paris, which is, this is the Champs-Élysées, by the way, folks. The equivalent, I guess, in Manhattan would be Fifth Avenue, Beverly Hills style area in Los Angeles. I mean, you name it. This is really the epicenter of where the wealth and capitalistic wealth in France is. Now, ironically, the rioting is over the growth of the government because they're against gas prices, which are about to go up because more taxation in order to fuel bigger government, Steve.
Yeah, Macron, amazingly, has a pro-free enterprise
President Macron. Yeah.
Macron. But he hasn't taken the big step, and that is start with the income tax. Just slash it. The Brussels and the European Union will rise up in arms and say you can't do that. Yes, you can. Do it. And you start to see France grow again, and by golly, that solves a lot of problems. So instead of these little things, a little tax here, a little tax there, try to get rid of their exit tax and good things like that, go for the big. He will emerge as a big figure, and France will emerge again as a country that really counts economically.
Now, there are people, as I mentioned before, politically waiting in the wings for Macron to go down. A number of them are socialists. They go even further to grow the government and to raise taxes, et cetera, all the things socialists do. In England, you have a socialist waiting in the wings in case Theresa May, her government falls. Do you think that Europe is more likely to go left or right as the establishment begins to fall, as looks what's happening in Paris right now?
Well, it's not left or right. It's whether they go over a cliff. Corbyn, the guy who heads the Labour Party in Britain, if he becomes prime minister,
another socialist.
Utter disaster. Utter disaster. Macron goes down in France, utter disaster. Who knows what's going to happen in Germany? Those are self-inflicted wounds. And what they should do is look what actually works. In Germany, after World War II, 4 years after World War II, a guy named Ludwig Erhard got rid of all controls, slashed taxes. Germany emerged from the rubble. Look what Thatcher did in Britain in the 1970s and 1980s. They should do the same thing again. Reduce the burden on people, have lower tax rates, less regulation, and by golly, they look like heroes, and they would be heroes. I don't understand. Why don't they look at history and go with what works? Hello, guys.
Well, we're looking at history right now. Again, live shots from Paris as the fires on the streets of the Champs-Élysées continue. We're going to continue to follow this right here on Fox News. Steve Forbes, thank you so much. Well, President Trump preparing for trade talks with China's President Xi Jinping at the G20 summit in Argentina next week. So does he need to stay tough, or is it time to strike some kind of deal? Joining me now, author of The Coming Collapse of China, Mr. Gordon Chang. Great to see you again, Gordon. So Wall Street wants some kind of deal. I mean, you can see what happened with the gyrations this week. A lot of it had to do with China and the collapse of worldwide trade, or at least the slowdown of worldwide trade. But on the other hand, U.S. Trade Representative Bob Lighthouser, his office came out with a devastating report about China's continuing stealing of our technology, a lot of it used directly for their military. So can we afford to give in instead of staying tough?
The answer is no. Of course, David, everyone wants a deal. Everyone wants to see cooperative relations. But you got to remember, September 2015, that same Xi Jinping stood in the Rose Garden next to President Obama, and they agreed that they would not hack the commercial enterprises of the other state for commercial purposes. Well, China never stopped hacking our companies for that. And so it's actually gotten worse. And that was the Lighthouser report. That's also the report from the NSA of last week. Clearly, the Chinese have been ramping up the theft of U.S. intellectual property since at least the middle of last year.
And we should mention that where our technology is primarily, because we're a free market economy, is primarily in the private sector, their technology is primarily, when they steal technology, it goes directly to the military, does it not? To reinforce their hardware. In some cases, I'm told that the technology of their military may be exceeding ours.
Yes, and it's certainly true. Xi Jinping wants a state-dominated system. So we've seen over the 6 years of his rule a retreat of the private sector, the advance of the state sector. So all of that technology goes to the state, ends up in the hands of the military. And this is one of the reasons why it's very difficult for Xi Jinping to agree with the United States, because his vision is a strong state. Our vision is no one steals intellectual property. These are mutually inconsistent at this point.
Now, on the other hand, I know the argument that they are not a democracy. I accept that. Obviously, it's a communist dictatorship, and he is has coalesced his power. He's becoming more of a dictator than his predecessors. Nevertheless, he has to please somebody. I'm sure there are a group of generals that are waiting in the wings. They're saying, you better do something to get this economy kicking again, because it's slowing down dramatically. And I imagine he's getting some pressure he has to deal with to make a deal with the U.S.
He's getting a lot of pressure precisely because of what you said, that he has been able to accumulate power. When you accumulate power, you have nobody else to blame. So when things go right, it's great for Xi Jinping, like last year. When things don't go right, like this year, it's really a problem. Xi Jinping, in effect, faces an election every day, David. So right now,
What do you mean by that?
That means he could lose power tomorrow. If things don't go right, they're not going to wait 5 years to the next party Congress. They're going to go after him right away. Because what Xi Jinping has done during his 6 years in power is to deinstitutionalize the Communist Party. He's thrown out the rules. When you don't have rules, it means that this is no holds barred fighting. And that's why Xi Jinping right now can't compromise. He owns the struggle with the United States. If he doesn't prevail, if he doesn't get 100%, he's out. So he's not going to compromise. And that means it's going to be hard to get a real deal. We might have sort of a mock deal, but not a real one.
That's not good news for Wall Street.
No, they're not going to like this at all. But unfortunately, what's in the interests of the American consumer, the American worker, and the United States is very different from the interests of stock.